I'm from Connecticut, and for the past year, I've been in a long-distance relationship with my girlfriend, who lives in Georgia. The distance between us is a challenge, but I've always loved road trips, so I don't mind the drive. There's something incredibly freeing about traveling the highways of the US by yourself. Nothing but you, the open road, and the hum of the engine. I've driven across the country and back on my own, and every journey feels like a little adventure. To save money, I often sleep in my car. It's not as bad as it sounds. I like to think of it as camping in a metal tent. It makes me feel like I'm really roughing it. I recline the seat, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. I've never bothered putting anything up to block the windows for privacy. Looking back, maybe I should have. The trip from Connecticut to Georgia is a comfortable 2-day drive. I usually stop somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border to rest for the night. Rest stops are my go-to because they're often less trafficked and quieter than truck stops. Normally, I'd stop at a Love's, but on this particular trip, I was so exhausted that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. The journey started like any other. I left Connecticut just after sunrise, the crisp spring air filling my lungs as I loaded up my car with a few essentials. A cooler with snacks, a playlist of my favorite road trip songs, and a map, just in case my GPS failed me. I know it's old school, but I like having a backup. The first few hours were uneventful, beautiful, even. I drove through familiar stretches of highway, watching the landscape shift from the urban sprawl of the Northeast to the rolling hills of the Mid-Atlantic. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I crossed into Virginia. I was about 6 hours from my usual stopping point, and fatigue was starting to creep in. I decided to turn on the radio to keep myself alert. I scanned through the stations, expecting to hear some classic rock or maybe a local news broadcast. But what I found was strange. A crackling voice came through the speakers, low and distorted, as if the signal was barely holding. To all travelers on Highway 81 tonight, the voice said, "Be cautious. There have been reports of unusual activity near the Virginia-North Carolina border. If you see anything strange, do not stop. I repeat, do not stop." The broadcast cut off abruptly, replaced by static. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Unusual activity? What did that mean? I figured it was probably a prank, some local radio station trying to spook late-night drivers. Still, the message left an uneasy feeling in my gut. I turned off the radio and focused on the road, the hum of the tires on asphalt my only companion. A couple of hours later, I stopped at a gas station to refuel and stretch my legs. It was a small, rundown place, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and a single attendant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. As I filled up my tank, a man approached me. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a tattered jacket. He carried a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Headed south?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, eyeing him cautiously. "Georgia." He nodded, his eyes darting to the highway. "You be careful out there, son. Things ain't right tonight." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been on these roads for years, seen things you wouldn't believe. Last week, I was at a rest stop not far from here. Middle of the night, I heard singing. A woman's voice, coming from the woods. Thought it was my imagination at first, but then I saw her." "Saw who?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite the growing unease in my chest. "A woman," he said, his eyes wide. Long black hair, pale as death. She was just standing there, staring at me. I got the hell out of there as fast as I could. But I swear, I could still hear her singing as I drove away. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the chill that ran down my spine. "Sounds like you had a rough night." He didn't laugh. "You'll see," he said cryptically before turning and walking back toward the gas station. I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Singing? A woman with long black hair? I shook my head, chalking it up to an overactive imagination or maybe too much time on the road. But as I got back in my car and continued my drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As the miles stretched on, my mind began to wander. The stranger's story had stirred up a memory I hadn't thought about in years. When I was a kid, my dad used to tell me stories about his own road trips. He was a truck driver, always on the move, and he had a knack for spinning tales that were equal parts thrilling and terrifying. One story in particular came back to me now, as I drove through the dark Virginia night. Dad had been driving through Tennessee late one night, he'd said, when he stopped at a rest area to catch a few hours of sleep. He was alone, or so he thought. Around 2 a.m., he woke up to the sound of someone humming, a soft, melodic tune that seemed to come from just outside his truck. He looked out the window but saw nothing. The humming continued, growing louder, until he finally worked up the courage to step outside. That's when he saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing at the edge of the woods. She had long black hair that fell past her waist, and her skin was so pale it seemed to glow in the moonlight. She was humming to herself, her voice hauntingly beautiful. Dad said he felt drawn to her, like her song was pulling him in, but something in his gut told him to stay away. He got back in his truck, locked the doors, and drove off without looking back. He never saw her again, but he swore that for the rest of that drive, he could hear her humming in the back of his mind. He told me to be careful on the road, especially at night. Some things out there, he'd said, they don't want you to leave. I'd always thought it was just a story, something to scare me as a kid. But now, with the stranger's warning and the eerie radio broadcast still fresh in my mind, I wasn't so sure. What if there was some truth to it? What if there really was something out there, waiting for travelers like me? By the time I reached the Virginia-North Carolina border, I was exhausted. I'd been driving for nearly 12 hours, and my eyes were heavy. I spotted a rest stop sign and decided to pull in. It wasn't a Love's, which I preferred, but I was too tired to care. The rest stop was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple of lone cars parked under the amber street lamps. Most likely travelers with the same idea as myself, I thought. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I'd have more privacy there, as opposed to being bathed in light. I went through my usual routine. Locked the doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in the ignition, reclined the seat, and tried to sleep. I'd never been interrupted on any of my car camping nights before, so I didn't expect anything unusual. But after the strange encounters earlier that night, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of dread. I must have dozed off at some point because I was jolted awake by a sharp tap. At first, I thought I'd heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes, disoriented. Since I was reclined, I was facing the ceiling of my car and couldn't see anything outside. Another tap came, sharper this time, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. Came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I was parked under a tree. Maybe something had fallen from the branches. A squirrel? A bird? Or something else? The thought hit me like a freight train. What if it wasn't an animal? What if it was a person poking around outside? My mind raced. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes. The keys were in the ignition. I could leave in an instant. Still, I lay there, completely still, pretending to be asleep, hoping whoever it was would leave me alone. It was better not to find out. I was too afraid to find out. Ignorance felt safer, but the tapping continued, relentless. I couldn't just lie there forever. I had to do something. I had to look. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and slowly raised my head to peer out the windshield. What I saw sent a jolt through my entire body. Every muscle locked up in pure shock. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out the horrifying sight. There, on my hood, was a woman. Her face was pressed right up against my windshield, staring directly at me. Her expression was frozen in a permanent grin. Her lips stretched wide to reveal rotten, jagged teeth. Her eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites, and her nose was pressed painfully into the glass. Her skin was sickly pale, almost glowing in the dim light, and her long, filthy black hair hung down around her face like a curtain. It was her, the woman from the stranger's story, the woman from my dad's tale. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Terror gripped me as I stared into those lifeless, white eyes. She didn't move, didn't blink, just kept grinning that horrible grin. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear, but eventually, I snapped out of it. My hand shot to the ignition, and the engine roared to life, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. For a split second, I'd been terrified I was in one of those horror movie scenarios where the car won't start as the killer approaches. I threw the car into reverse, desperate to get away. In my panic, I hit the windshield wipers, as if that would somehow get her off. Was I about to drive out of here with this lunatic clinging to my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to find out. As I backed up, she leapt off, landing on all fours like an animal. I caught a glimpse of her in the dim light. Her movements were unnatural, jerky, like something out of a nightmare. Seizing my chance, I shifted into drive and floored it, just as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. As I sped out of the parking lot, she let out a piercing shriek, a sound so guttural and inhuman it sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced in my rearview mirror and, for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me. Running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't be sure. I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged onto the highway, picking up speed as fast as I could. I didn't dare stop again until the morning light broke over the horizon. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see her behind me, but there was nothing, just the empty highway stretching out before me. When I finally reached Georgia, I told my girlfriend everything. She listened, wide-eyed, as I recounted the radio broadcast, the strange traveler, my dad's story, and the horrifying encounter at the rest stop. She believed me, or at least she said she did, but I could tell she was shaken. We agreed that on my next trip, I'd find a cheap motel to stay in instead of sleeping in my car. I wasn't about to take any more chances. I don't know who or what that woman was. Maybe she was just a disturbed person, someone who'd been living off the grid for too long. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that she was something more, something unnatural. The way she moved, the sound of that shriek, the way her eyes rolled back, it wasn't human. I still love road trips, but I don't think I'll ever feel quite as free on the highway as I used to. Every time I drive at night now, I can't help but glance in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale, grinning face staring back at me. And sometimes, when the road is quiet and the darkness presses in, I swear I can hear a faint, melodic humming, just like my dad described all those years ago.